Well, hi, everybody. My name is Mark Graban. Welcome to our KaiNexus webinar titled The Three Primary Assumptions of Successful Lean Leaders. And it's going to be presented today by our guest, Jacob Stoller. So let me now start by introducing our guest. Jacob Stoller is an author, speaker, and consultant specializing in communication between experts and outsiders in areas such as lean management, information technology, accounting, and engineering. A frequent commentator in the business press, Jacob has delivered a variety of learning events in Canada and the US and has authored reports, training materials, and other corporate documents for clients such as Microsoft, Dell, Staples, Pitney Bowes, and the Conference Board of Canada. And Jacob's recent book, which I highly recommend, is called The Lean CEO, where he uses CEO narratives to bridge the communication gap between lean experts and the general business community. So with that, welcome, Jacob. I will hand things over to you.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's great to be here. And maybe listeners aren't aware of this, but almost exactly a year ago, Mark and I did a podcast together and discussing the Lean CEO, and it was just about to hit the bookshelves at that point. So here we are a year later, and really happy to say that the feedback you get from a book that you've written from people is just amazing, and it's an amazing learning experience. So I'm really happy to be able to share some of that experience with you. Some of what people have told me and some of what's resonated, it really is reflected in what we're going to talk about. So let's get right into it. I've used maybe a loaded term here in the title, primary assumptions, and I want to tell you just right off the bat what that's about. Mark, could you change the slide, please? I confronted this whole thing of assumptions sort of dramatically when I was in a plane, actually flying back from Hartford, Connecticut, back home to Toronto. And this is not, this was last November, not a very popular route. So, you know, you get on these little planes. It's called a Beech 1900D, and those of you who fly to different factories probably fly in these things a lot. But anyway, we took off from Hartford, and everything was pretty normal. We get to cruising altitude, and then three things happened at once. The plane starts lurching around, and at the same time there was this horrible crunching metallic noise coming from the exterior of the plane. And finally, when we looked out the right window, we could see there was smoke and flames coming out of the right engine. So not the sort of thing you want to have happen when you're in the air. But the good news is that it all passed by very, very quickly. Within seconds, the plane had stabilized. They had shut down the right engine, and there we were sort of flying along. And needless to say, we made an emergency landing in Albany, New York, and I tell you, you make these emergency landings, you really get the big welcome. Emergency vehicles along the runway, the whole works, right? So anyway, we landed, very nicely, taxied to the end of the runway, and then they basically the plane gets off the runway and they shut it right down. That's how they do it. So now here's the interesting part. So plane stops, the curtains open, and the pilot comes out of his cockpit, and of course we gave him applause because he did a fabulous job landing the plane. But then he started to talk to us about what was, about the whole incident. And it turns out that the pilot knew much less about this failure of the aircraft engine than we did. He didn't know anything about the smoke and flames coming out of the exhaust. He didn't know anything even about the crunching metallic noise. All he knew was that the oil pressure gauge had dropped suddenly, dramatically down. Suddenly it just fell. And he, without question, had just, without even thinking, had shut down the engine. I guess what fascinates me is that just this little sliver of information he used to make this really, really important decision. So I called up my brother-in-law, who happens to be a flight instructor, and told him about this. And he said, absolutely. He said, if you're a pilot, it's an absolute primary assumption that you follow your instruments. There's no question about it. That's the way to get home. And he pointed out that if you're a flyer, you can get into all kinds of situations where your senses can completely fool you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I mean about primary assumptions. You know, what are the things that we absolutely assume without even thinking? We, of course, have to have assumptions like this when we're running a business. The basic assumption that we have. So this command and control dashboard, if you will, is I like to call it Sloan's Dashboard, because really it was developed at General Motors under the supervision of Alfred Sloan, and he was very proud of this, of having developed a system where you could issue commands and you could look at results, mostly financial results, and that told you what you needed to do. He was very proud. If you read my years with General Motors, you could see he was very proud of that. He was very proud of the fact that there was no need to go to Gemba. You didn't have to go to the workplace because you had the perfect system that reported and the controls and all that to make that work. Primary assumption: financial reports tell the truth about the business. That's the primary assumption that they teach in business school. That's the way Sloan ran the business. Okay. Now, the bad news is that financials don't tell you everything. As we all know, I think from our history, the General Motors did really fantastically well until about the early 70s. And here you started to get all kinds of problems. You get fuel prices skyrocketing with OPEC. All of a sudden, the growth of suburbia, which just saw no end, is starting to stabilize. And then guess what? Competition. We start to see these Toyotas and these Hondas showing up on American roads. So the whole climate got very different. And while the executives were wondering what in the world was going on, along came Dr. Deming, who pointed out that your companies have big problems. So a lot of this stuff that we took for granted, I guess, there were all kinds of problems that didn't show up on the financials. So, for example, American factories, as we know, had all kinds of variation. You know, the quality of these cars was really terrible when you compared them to the emerging world standard. Waste was rampant when people walked into factories, and finally, you know, employee disengagement was huge, right? You had people very, very unhappy to work at a place like General Motors, as Peter Drucker very aptly pointed out. So again, these are problems that did not show up in the numbers. And Dr. Deming said it beautifully: 97% of these problems are going to be invisible if you're just looking at the financials. So that really is the backdrop for my book. The people who developed Lean really developed it out of crisis, if you will. That's, again, to quote Deming. And, you know, for example, Pat Lancaster of Landtech had a company which was full of that kind of waste, as he described it. But, you know, he had a monopoly because he invented stretch wrap, and there was no competitors. And so during that whole period, he could basically, the company was very profitable. But when it became competitive, and when the copyright, you know, the patents ran out, then he was in a position to have to compete on a global basis. So, but Pat's a great quote. He also is an amateur flyer, by the way, and he said something that I love about Sloan's Dashboard. He said, I don't want to say this too strongly, but I really think that if you drive your ship or fly your airplane based on the two instruments of standard cost and MRP, you will pretty much drive yourself into a waste condition that is almost unimaginable. So that was one crisis. There were many productivity crises, etc. But the majority of the CEOs did feel that there was a burning platform that compelled them to adopt Lean. So that's an important part of the book and sort of the organizing theme there. So from the CEOs, by the way, I expected when I did the research that they would be pretty darn similar. You know, I had this idea, oh yeah, well, there's going to be a sort of a profile of the humble lean leader and all this kind of thing, right? But I found out that the personalities were very, very different. And I think for all of you who know some of these people, you know, you look at this list and you could say, by no stretch of the imagination is George Honigsecker any at all like Bob Brody, right? They're just completely different personalities, and you look through it, and that's pretty darn consistent. So really, I think the beauty of this and the exciting thing about Lean is that these leaders did find their own ways to do this, and they did it in very different ways with different sequences, different styles, solving different problems, whatever. It really is one of the things that shows the enormous power of Lean. But there was a commonality, I think, in terms of beliefs, and you know, they did believe in certain things about running the company, and that's really what we're going to talk about. 3 primary assumptions for running a business, and this is really, again, from looking at the transcripts really carefully, saying, what do these people really share? What comes up again and again in the transcripts? And I found out, you know, there was the way they handled information was very important. So there's an assumption, primary assumption about information. Underneath that information, there's a primary assumption about process that gives the information that context. And last, but certainly by not means the least, as a matter of fact, last but most important, it's a very, very primary assumption about people. So let's look at all 3 of those. First, there is a bit of a disclaimer I want to throw here, or whatever. Maybe disclaimer is not the right word, but there are many companies out there that are making lots of money by doing things that don't make customers very happy, right? So you might have a telco, for example, that's in a you know, has a monopoly or close to a monopoly in some region, and they're charging outrageously high prices, and customers hate them, right? So that's a kind of a thing where you know, you're not going to get lean thinking very often. And Fred Reichelt in The Ultimate Question talks about corporations being addicted to bad profits. And I think there's a lot more of that than we would like to see, you know, whether it's airline fees that you know, you feel they're gouging you or whatever. So I think we have to take that off the table, because any company that's making money by not making, you know, not necessarily making customers happy is not likely to have any kind of appetite at all for the sorts of challenges that Lean provides. So I just wanted to make that clear. So let's go to the primary assumptions then. And the first is that customer value is the primary dashboard for success. Now remember what we've done. We've taken, you know, we're no longer relying completely on the financial reports, right? So we're kind of flying blind. How do we know that we're moving forward? Well, customer value does become that primary metric. So in the book, it really becomes an exercise of what I would call radical transparency, because you have people going out into the Gemba to see what's really happening with the business. And as I think we all realize, it's a question of finding out what the real problems are. So those problems that we talked about, waste, customer dissatisfaction, or employee dissatisfaction, variation, all that, those all become very, very visible when people are spending time in Gemba. And by the way, that's the most consistent behavior of all, right? Most consistent behavior really in the book was that the CEOs really did spend time out there in the workplace. So that's actually not a very easy way to run a company. It's very uncomfortable for people with traditional business backgrounds. You have, for example, there we go, jumped one on me there. People used to, again, just looking at results and issuing commands. So that's what they tell you in a traditional organization. I just want the results. Don't tell me anymore. And then they tell you what to do. But of course, in a lean organization, we're really changing the whole nature of communication, and we can explain it in various ways. You know, flipping the pyramid or whatever. People have different ways of describing it. But here we have management. Really, their job is to tell what we're trying to do, the true north, and they are going to be hearing problems all the time. So you're not seen as a non-team player when you when you report problems. That's what you need to do. So it's not easy to do, and one of the CEOs that takes it really, really personally is Carl Wadenston. He's the CEO of Vico, and Carl says, you know, this is not for the weak of heart. This is so hard every single doggone day. Lean will surface all of your shortcomings and force you to deal with all the details. And by the way, you should see Carl's office. You know, he's got it right out there in the plant, and all the walls are glass. You know, so he's got no escape from reality. Maybe it's why he wears the army helmet and jokes around a bit, but makes himself very accessible and really does learn about all the problems in the organization. So, of course, when we don't have the financial dashboard anymore running the business, we need something else. And Eburn provided such a great teaching model, I think, for Lean with wire mold. For all of you who maybe don't know wire mold, that's one of the iconic Lean stories. They're an electrical components manufacturer based in Hartford, and Art took over as CEO in 1990, and in that 10-year period, he multiplied the value of the company from around 30-something million to 770. So a huge success by growing his market organically and also acquiring many companies and using Lean to make them more efficient. Now, these 5 tools, these 5 metrics here in the dashboard are not the kind of thing that you just see in a report. These are for everybody in the entire company, and he had his whole management team reporting every week on these metrics. That's how he ran the business. So, you know, customer service percentage, we're going for 100%. He said there's no reason why you should promise to deliver something and then not do it. Quality, very, very aggressive, you know, cutting by 50% every year. You know, you hear organizations talk about 10% improvement in improving defects. Much, much more aggressive. Productivity, very, very aggressive targets with takt time. Inventory turns, a huge, very famous target because he was at 3. Did he go to 4? By the way, I just read a business study about a success story about a company that went from 3 to 4. Well, Art went from 3 to 20. So very, very dramatic improvements here. And again, everybody reading off the same script. So now it's very easy for organizations, let's see, hope it's going to, there we go, to promise to add all these things. And I think what we see in a lot of organizations that do Lean in a sort of a casual way, if you will, is that they'll add some metrics. Say, sure, yeah, let's add inventory turns to what we're doing, and we'll continue to do all the other stuff. But when Art started with wire mold, a manager asked him, you know, in the first week, he said, okay, if we're going to go after all these value stream metrics, does that mean that I still have to write my management report, my 25-page financial report every month? And Art said, well, you can write the report if you like, but I can guarantee you that I won't read it. And, you know, interestingly, Mike Lamach said a very similar thing about Ingersoll Rand. And, of course, Ingersoll Rand, with 50,000 employees, he's doing this on a very, very large scale. So they're doing going value stream by value stream. But when a value stream signs up for the operational excellence program at Ingersoll Rand, the thing that Mike tells his managers is, don't look past the results. You know, and that means, in other words, that you don't have to worry about all that financial stuff that you used to worry about. You just focus on the Lean results. You do what we're doing. You stick with the program, and that's going to get you your results. So it's having that confidence in the Lean and in the Lean numbers that you're going to get. That's really key here. Now, of course, none of these value stream metrics make any sense at all if you got silos, right? So yeah, we can get rid of some bottlenecks in production, and maybe we improve efficiency by 10%, but it may well be that the customer doesn't see any of that because we still got bottleneck in procurement or engineering or whatever, right? So a really important part of these lean transformations that we saw is seeing the whole value stream. In fact, that was a turning point in a number of the stories when they reorganized, restructured into value streams. They were able to really make gains that could be seen by the customer. Finally, on the dashboard side, I want to talk about accountability because that's such a big deal here. What you're accountable for and things like that. And Jim Lancaster, who is the CEO of Landtech, really said this very well. Jim is actually in a unique situation because he took over a successful lean transformation from his dad. That's Landtech, which I mentioned earlier. And after Jim had taken over, the company hit a sort of a plateau where all the gains and all the wonderful magic that was coming from lean actually started to slow down and actually started losing some of it. And he got very, very concerned. Now, but Jim was a traditional MBA, so he tried a lot of the traditional stuff, right, where people said, well, you've got to be tougher on people, and he went and he hired some managers that were known for enforcing targets and saying you better hit your number this month or else, kind of thing. And none of that was working. So eventually he, in his own words, put on his steel-toe shoes and spent an entire year in the factory. He delegated all his CEO duties. And the outshoot of it is that he really wound up having some profound sort of aha moments, I guess, about accountability and what accountability really means in a lean environment. And I love what he says here. He says accountability is not about setting goals and then shaming people who don't hit the goals. Accountability is about making sure that everyone understands what we're trying to do. So, I asked Jim, I thought this was, I love the way he said this, but I said, Jim, what happens if a manager makes a mistake? And without missing a beat, Jim said, if a manager makes a mistake, it's because they didn't have the information they needed to make the right decision. And I thought that was really, really amazing. He really does put accountability at his own doorstep. So that brings us to really, again, waiting for this slide to click here, but it brings us to the next layer here, if you will, and this is the process piece that makes all this information make sense, okay? This is really the context. And I've chosen my words carefully here, but I'm saying that continuous improvement of people and processes towards an ideal state leads to sustainable results. So, all that has to be there to make sense out of this. And I just want to take it apart a bit here, because this is a piece that a lot of traditional business people have trouble with. We're saying that we're going to develop people. We're not going to, it's not like an airplane dashboard where you push a button and the engine shuts down, right? It's all very indirect. We're going to develop people so the people improve the processes in order to derive results. So, and even then, the results we're seeing from improving these processes are even somewhat indirect. Reducing waste, improving cycle times, etc., getting rid of all the bad stuff, and that means we can avoid capital costs, we can avoid adding headcount, and eventually we see a much better bottom line. We generate tons of cash, of course, because we're not wasting space and resources. Margins improve, and then we become very, very strongly competitive. Mike Lamack said something very hilarious. He said when he explains what Ingersoll Rand is doing to some of these financial people that he meets, they say, why are you going through all this trouble? I said, why don't you just do a big restructuring and get it over with? So that's going to be, the kind of resistance you see. And Brian Walker has another great story about this. Herman Miller, as you may know, one of the iconic success stories of lean. Herman Miller is, I believe, the first Toyota reference site outside of the automotive industry. But anyway, Brian had to fight some battles earlier on with his board members, and Mike, he's actually got a sense of humor about this, but he said he'd have conversations like this. You know, he would say, someone would ask him, this lean thing you're doing, when are we going to be done? And Brian would say, we're never going to be done. And they would say, okay, well, when are we going to know that we're sort of on the right track with this? And Brian says, I can't exactly tell you this because we don't know what success is going to look like, et cetera, right? These things would go on and on. So eventually Brian said, okay, I'm going to really, you know, I really better show them something. So he invited the entire board to come visit a plant in West Michigan. Well, he flies the whole board in. They meet together. They go out to the site of this plant, and he walks right up to the factory door, and he says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the advantage of lean. And opens the door, and here's what they saw: empty building. And so you got these board members just sitting there with their mouths open, saying, "What? An empty building? This is the advantage of lean?" And Brian said, "That's right." He said, because 3 years ago we built this building, we filled it with equipment, and now over the last 3 years we've used lean to move all the capacity out of this building into other existing facilities. So now, when it's time to expand, we can do it with no capital costs. That, said Brian, is the point where the board really got the picture. Now, the resistance is pretty tough on the shop floor as well. It's not just board members, and Jim tells a great story about that. Now, what Jim told me is that a lot of times the people that it's hardest for is the middle managers, the people who sort of have their targets and used to, you know, seeing they get enough greens showing up on their board, and they say, okay, well, I'm okay for the month, sort of thing. But what he found is that in the continuous improvement environment, they find it kind of challenging. So what he does is he'll be doing his Gemba walks, and if he sees an area where they've been posting, all making their targets, in other words, all posting greens, he'll say, it's time for a cookie. And what he does is he goes and buys one of these oversized chocolate chip cookies, right? And he brings it in, and he shakes the manager's hand and says, okay, now it's time to re-average the numbers. And of course, they re-average the numbers, the bar raises, and sure enough, the next day there's going to be reds again, right? They won't be making the targets. But what he says is hard for people to understand, and what's really important is that reds are not bad. Reds are our friends. If we didn't have problems, we wouldn't have a reason to be here. Big culture change. Finally, this is very tough on people with professional training. And basically, I could give you examples from pretty much any profession, but you know, HR, for example, it's customary for HR people. They go off to a conference and they attend a workshop on all the latest learning methods, right? And then they're all excited, and they come back and they sit in their office for 2 weeks and develop a great learning program about safety or team building or some darn thing, right? And then they want to go out and deliver that training to their people. But in a lean environment, continuous improvement environment, you really need these people out there solving problems, because there's all kinds of problems emerging from all over the place, right? So it's changing that role, and it's very, very hard for people very often. Accounting is another great example. You know, accountants love to go and tell people what all their problems are, and you know, it's really what you need the accounting people doing is you need financial advisors, right? You need them to come out there. Don't tell me what I should have done 6 weeks ago. Tell me what I need to do because I got this big project coming up. What's the most efficient way to do it? So you get some great examples of people in accounting, great aha moments of accountants doing that. IT, I worked in it for years, and there's a system builder mentality. Really, you need the IT people providing real-time information to the field. And professionals, you know, leads to the whole thing of physicians, which is, you know, really, I think that a very, very special case. I would refer you to Mark's books here to really study that one, because it's it's quite an issue. But I just want to tell you, in terms of continuous improvement, give a sort of a story about what I think is really a watershed moment. And this was the dawn of lean healthcare, and really perhaps one of the watershed moments, and this is where John Toussaint really of ThedaCare really began using lean, and he was facing the same kinds of that healthcare conundrum that's very common today, and we still very, very far to go with this, obviously, but where you have financial pressures and you have unacceptable outcomes at the same time. Now, unacceptable outcomes, unfortunately, in healthcare means people are dying. And around the millennium, when John took over as CEO of ThedaCare, there was a report had come out saying that there were 100,000 deaths in American hospitals every year due to preventable medical error. That's how serious it is. And by the way, some people think the number is much, much higher than that. But anyway, what John was frustrated about was that he had tried the traditional healthcare methods, quality improvement methods as chief physician, and he found that the improvements he made at ThedaCare just weren't sticking. They weren't maintaining. But he knew that outside of healthcare, there were all kinds of organizations that were doing a really, quite a good job. He said, how is it that aerospace and automotive, we've got organizations that are getting near zero defects, and here we are in healthcare in the double digits. So needless to say, he started looking outside of healthcare at other organizations, and through actually George KaiNexus, he wound up looking at some lean organizations. Soon, John and his entire management team went to visit a lean factory, and this was Ariens, a snowblower factory nearby in Brillion, Wisconsin. And Ariens, by the way, is one of the stories also in my book, The Lean CEO. So anyway, you get this group of physicians walking through a snowblower factory. Might have looked kind of strange to a lot of people. And they tour the factory, and they're pretty impressed. But they get to the final assembly area, and this is really the big aha moment for John. And here what you had is the snowblowers are moving along on carts being assembled, get the final assembly is being done, all the options are being installed, all that kind of stuff, right? So you see this happening, and John has this flash. He said, when I watch the way these people are working, they're taking better care of these snowblowers than we're taking care of our patients. So I thought that was quite a profound thing to say, especially because John said his entire management team agreed with him. So I asked Dan Ariens about this afterwards. I said, Dan, what did a bunch of doctors see in your snowblower factory? And Dan said something really interesting. He said they weren't looking at the snowblowers. They were looking at the people. What they saw is people supporting each other. They saw the communication. They saw people handing each other tools on trays. That's what they saw. And I think that's profound, and I still do, and today, you could go to an AIM event or another lean, any kind of manufacturing event, and you can see people from healthcare, from industry, from financial industries, all going to the same workshops, all sitting at lunch talking about the same problems. So, I think Deming would smile about that if he'd seen one of those events. But, the fact that we should work on our process, not the outcome of our process, is just so incredibly important. So, of course, that leads us to the people that own those processes. And the whole bedrock of this thing, the thing that holds it all together, is that people have a basic human need to do exceptional work. Exceptional means not just doing what you're told. This means going above and beyond, and offering your creativity, all this kind of thing. And that people will do this when the barriers are removed. So the job of management is to remove the barriers so that people can do what they really have a basic human need to do. By the way, this is not just some kind of thing you put on a wall plaque. This is scientifically proven. There've been psychological, tests, clinical tests for the last 50 years that have proven that this is the case. So it's really time that management gets caught up to this reality. Okay, so really, Demings said all anyone asks for is a chance to work with pride. I think some of you folks are aware of Barry Waymiller, and that's Bob Chapman, who really came to Lean really through a desire to make a more humane environment for his workers. He found that Barry Waymiller is a very successful company built with machinery and taking companies and turning them around, but he actually, had a bit of, like I say, a bit of an epiphany in midlife and developed some guiding principles around people-centric management. But it really took off when he actually started to combine Lean with that, and it happened sort of by accident because they acquired Mark Ward United, where Jerry Solomon was actually leading the Lean transformation there, and some of you might know Jerry through his books. But anyway, when Jerry and Bob got together, it became pretty clear that Lean and people-centric management were a very, very good match. But it really came to a head when they did a pilot, and they went, Bob and Jerry both went to a report out where things were being presented, and there was a sort of a consultant that got up and presented Lean, the Lean results for the first time, and Bob had never seen this kind of thing before. But it was really about all numbers, things like lead times and reducing inventory. And interestingly, Bob got very upset because he said, "Look, this has got nothing to do with people-centric management. This is all about numbers. This is not what I want to do." But it so happened that there was another presentation scheduled for the next morning, but this was not by a consultant. This was by actual line employees who had been brought sort of spur of the moment to come and present. So they get up there. It's first thing in the morning. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning, right? And there are all these people there because it was a president's meeting. So these relatively unprepared workers get up and start to present, and it's all about these kinds of things, the numbers, lead times, whatever. And Bob this time got up and interrupted the presenter. The presenter was called Steve. Bob said, "Steve, how has this changed your life?" And so you can imagine, first thing in the morning, all these people there, and a bit of a silence. And then Steve sort of blurted out, "My wife is talking to me more." And Bob's just stammered out, "What? Help me, Steve. What do you mean?" And Steve then told what Bob describes as one of the most profound stories he's ever heard. He said, "Well, Mr. Chapman, you know how it is. You go to work in the morning and you punch in your clock, and they tell you what to do, but they don't give you everything you need to do it. But you spend the day, you figure out how to do some things, and you get 10 things right, but no one says a word, and you get one thing wrong, and immediately they're on top of you and they're chewing you out. And then they complain about your salary and they complain about your benefits. And you know what? At the end of the day, I wasn't feeling too good about myself. And I was wearing that feeling home, and it was affecting my marriage." And he said, "But now, with this new program, I'm contributing to something. People ask for my opinion, and they listen to me. And when I ask questions, I get answers. And then I get to see the results of the work we've done. And you know what? At the end of the day, when I go home, I'm feeling much better about myself, and I'm nicer to my wife, and she's talking to me." So at that point, Bob turned to Jerry and said, "Jerry, we have a new metric for Lean, the reduction of the divorce rate in America." So the point here, folks, is that people really do need to do work that has meaning. It's not just they want people to be nice to them. It's just they really is a very basic need for meaningful work. And you just look at the Gallup polls, and they all say that 85% or whatever of employees really go home not feeling that they're wanted or needed by their employers. So it's just a very, very great human need. Now, it also happens that organizations need people way more than they think they do. And my favorite example comes from John Toussaint, because I asked him about this. I asked him very innocently. I said, John, why why do you need so many problem solvers in a hospital? And John said, well, okay. He said, let's take an example. Let's look at medication error. That's one of the deadliest problems we have in hospitals. He said, but if you've got a medication error problem, it's not going to be one or two things that a manager can find on a report. It's going to be lots and lots of things. So it could be the labeling on bottles. It could be the way bottles are arranged on trays. It could be the way bottles are in storage rooms. It could be written procedures. It could be in communications. It could be in the IT systems. It could be in the supply chain. It goes on. And the only way you're going to fix it is by having an army of problem solvers, all your employees who are empowered and trained to take standard work, to find the problems, to test the solutions, and make sure that problems don't recur. And that is how the gains were made at ThedaCare, and that's what John is teaching today. So, and by the way, that applies to any industry. If you really want a company to aspire to greatness, it's going to take thousands of problem solvers every day out there in the workplace. So this, folks, provides the basis for a lasting partnership between workers and organizations. You know, they need each other, and I think it's a very, very powerful thing. We can do much, much better at this kind of relationship, and basically that's what I feel is the bedrock of this whole thing and of these core beliefs. So I guess I would turn this over to you, and I would ask you, you know, as people out there working with organizations and with Lean, is customer value seen through Gemba, your primary dashboard? You know, is that what's driving your company? Are you on a continuous improvement journey that never ends? And finally, are your people empowered to do exceptional work?
Okay, so we've got, let's see, there's a bunch of questions here. One, it says, we all talk about Lean, but thank you for mentioning Dr. Deming. That makes me curious. Do you know how many of these CEOs knew of Deming and combined that with traditional Lean methods?
I think the awareness of Deming was certainly very strong in this group. We didn't actually, it's interesting, we didn't talk explicitly about Deming. It was more that the conversations tend to be focused on what the companies did. But yeah, I would say that certainly the awareness of Deming was very high. In some cases, actually, knowledge of Deming preceded Lean. You know, for example, as Mark, as I know you know very well, with Bob Brody at Franciscan, they were using those methods for a while. Certainly John Toussaint as well.
Okay, I want to clarify. You said the rareness of Deming knowledge was strong. You mean a lot of them did know about Deming?
Yeah, awareness of Deming was strong. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said rareness. That makes more sense. The awareness was strong. Well, that's good to hear, and maybe no surprise why they were successful with this.
Yeah. I think there's some depth here in their thinking, and you know, they didn't just pick up a bunch of tools. These are people that saw the whole context of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great lesson in and of itself. We've got another question. How do you get people to feel safe speaking about problems when the current culture penalizes them for that?
Boy, you know, it's that's perhaps one of the reasons why the CEO buy-in is so important. You know, and they're unlikely to be shortcuts to that. You know, I don't think I would have a general answer to that in terms of drive out fear. But even, you know, of course, Deming was, I think, put drive out fear. I think in one interview, Mark, I think he was quoted as saying that was the most important thing to do. So it's a very important question. But failing, a very high level of support, it's hard to see how you could do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think, well, let me transition. So when we talk about, the need for change at the top of most organizations isn't really the CEO, it's the board. You mentioned, I think you mentioned John Toussaint's board. I know they played an important role. How many of these lean CEOs had a quote unquote lean board? And what can we do to try to influence the boards to think this way?
That's a really good question. I'm thinking of some of the public corporations here. I know at Ingersoll Rand, there's at least one person that's quite strong with lean on the board. I know Herman Miller had actually, and we talk about it in the book, they had Mary Ann Dringa on their board, and she actually pushed them for lean. So the board can have a strong effect. I think, in the privately held companies, a lot of these companies were privately held. The CEO has a certain amount of, maybe more latitude than they would in a public company, and they could perhaps, I don't want to say override the board, but they're not as beholden to the board as, say, a public company would be. But I think the board relationship is obviously an important one, and one that the CEOs definitely cultivated.
Okay, we've got, let's see, another question here. How can we create more lean CEOs? Practical question, and I do recommend your book, The Lean CEO, Jacob. Is this a type of book where, do you think if a CEO is skeptical about lean, that reading this book might convince them? Was that one of the goals of the book? I guess there's two questions there. Can we create more lean CEOs? How does your book help possibly do that?
Well, I think I certainly hope it helps, because I think that one of the things that changes people's behavior is stories and being able to identify with people. So if somebody, a CEO, is thinking about it and wants to see what it would feel like maybe to be a lean CEO, I believe, and I've been told that this book really does give that feeling. So yeah, I hope it will certainly help on that side. More generally, how do we get more lean CEOs? I think this is probably it's part of an evolution. I think that time's on our side, in a sense, in that companies are going to face more constraints, over the years as the global economy gets tougher, which it will. I think there'll be more and more companies that have to deliver customer value. I think we have to point out that the CEOs that did adopt lean, a large number of them admitted that they wouldn't have done it. And by the way, that includes even companies like Herman Miller. Wouldn't have done this without a burning platform of some sort. So maybe the question is, are the platforms going to be more burning platforms? And it would seem that there are, the kind of sheltered situations where you can avoid competition and stuff like that, I think, are going to decline over the next number of years. So
yeah.
I think we will be seeing more lean CEOs.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it will take time, people coming up through lean organizations and then moving to other places where they eventually hopefully become a CEO, as opposed to the current CEOs changing. Because you talk about a burning platform, I'm sure, people, there's a human tendency to stick with the status quo if the status quo isn't painful. I don't think anyone necessarily of their own volition says, yeah, I'm going to totally change the way I operate and behave without some real wake-up call. But it seems like a lot of these lean principles of being humble, being willing to admit you don't know it all, a lot of these things kind of fly in the face of what's held up. I went to business school, and what's sort of held up as typical CEO behavior is not in line with lean. There's a question that just came in: is Jack Welch a lean CEO? Jack Welch is the type of CEO that was held up as a hero in the late 90s when I was in business school. And I think he's probably he was successful, but I would say he's the furthest thing from a lean CEO. So I'm curious what you think in response to that.
Yeah, I think the thing about Welch that maybe a lot of people don't realize is that when you look at where the profits were coming from in that golden period, if you will, that was from GE Capital. In other words, basically what GE did at the time is they got into the banking business, and their advantage was that they were doing banking business without having to follow a lot of the rules that regulated banks had to follow. And when they got hit with that regulation in the early 2000s and started to behave like a bank, follow the same rules, and then that profitability started to decline. So, it's not like Jack Welch managed his way using, made all that profit. I mean, I think there are a lot of good things have been said about him, but I think he might be a bit overrated.
Well, because I mean, it's a thought experiment that we can never prove one way or another. You might say, well, had Jack Welch not rejected Demings' ideas, because in one of Jack's books, he said, well, Dr. Deming, he had good ideas, but they weren't practical. It was too theoretical. Like, well, but this thought exercise of, well, maybe they would have been more successful and more profitable had they followed a lean path, had they followed Demings' ideas. GE eventually came around on lean, I think, under the Jeff Immelt CEO tenure. But
they've come along. But even under Welch's, a number of people like Eburn was working for GE, under Welch, and so there was learning going on that eventually made someone like Art able to see, to appreciate lean right away when he saw it. So, I think there were some positive things. But anyway. But more lean CEOs. We certainly need them. I think one thing you touched on is the whole generation thing. There are younger leaders that are coming into the workforce that are seeing things a little differently. And Mike Lemack is of Ingersoll Rand. This is he's young for a CEO of that company, but he learned lean by working in the Toyota supply chain, and that's where he first saw it. And he learned that at an early age as an engineer. So, people who were exposed to it early in life, I think maybe you're more likely to become lean CEOs.
Okay, there's one more question, and I'm going to actually preface it. So probably about 9 years ago, I did a little bit of research, and at least the companies in the early 2000s that had won the Shingo Prize for manufacturing excellence, at least the public lean companies underperformed compared to the stock market as a whole. Now, some of these were companies that were in decline, auto companies, and there were bankruptcies and things that you might argue that lean couldn't have saved these companies. But the question that came in was, of the companies, the public companies that you looked at, Jacob, do you know how they performed in the market or in other measures compared to the average company?
Well, the performance of the companies I talked to is really good, public and private. But in a sense, I'll have to be honest, that's a little bit of an artificial selection, because had they done badly, I probably wouldn't have wound up talking to them. So it's not scientific at all.
Fair
but
enough.
They did well, yeah.
Fair enough. All right. Well, Jacob, I want to again thank you for being our presenter today. I want to thank everybody for attending. I would encourage you visit Jacob's website, jacobstoller.com. You can find him on Twitter, and it really is a good read. The book, The Lean CEO, a lot of great stories there. Might be the type of thing, I don't know, if you buy it, and I guess you can't slide a book under your CEO's door. Maybe you can give it as a gift. Thank you. And as a couple of people commented here, great job with your presentation, Jacob.
Well, thanks so much, Mark, and thanks for all that you do to promote this kind of thinking.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for all of your work, and thank you, everyone. This is Mark Graban from KaiNexus signing off.